I was strolling through the school hallway when the blaring emergency alarm abruptly shattered the tranquility, sending shockwaves of panic through the crowd. My gaze darted towards the window, and the scene that greeted me defied belief. Torrential rain and ferocious winds swirled outside, creating an environment of utter chaos. Visibility was minimal at best. In the midst of this tempest, an ominous force slammed into the window I was peering through, shattering the glass into 1,000 glittering shards. The shards cascaded onto the floor, exacerbating the panic that had already gripped the students and me. Chaos reigned supreme. Teachers, school staff, and security personnel urgently implored us to seek refuge in the hallway, far away from the vulnerable windows, and take cover on the floor. But the students, overwhelmed by fear and confusion, jostled and screamed, some even attempting to bolt for the exit. My chest constricted, and it felt as though every breath was a struggle. For me, this had been the ultimate nightmare, a fear that had plagued me for as long as I could remember. While some of my friends harbored fears of spiders, snakes, or heights, mine was an overwhelming dread of storms. I couldn't pinpoint when it had begun. It seemed to have been with me since early childhood. News reports of devastating tsunamis, earthquakes, and hurricanes from around the world had instilled in me an unshakable apprehension that such cataclysms might strike our town. Regrettably, my parents hadn't taken my fear seriously. Their assurances that tsunamis and earthquakes were unheard of in our region held little comfort. While acknowledging that hurricanes were a remote possibility, they insisted that they were exceedingly rare. Instead of empathy, my parents and even my classmates had often teased me mercilessly about my storm phobia. Whenever a thunderstorm rumbled in the distance and my nerves tingled, they would jest that perhaps it was about to escalate into a full-blown hurricane. There was a girl named Regan who used to make light of my fear, poking fun at my dread of storms, until one day it all became too much, and I had a panic attack. I couldn't help but wonder who was laughing now. We were now ensnared in the midst of a genuine storm, one grander and more terrifying than anything I had ever witnessed before. Despite some valiant efforts by the adults to maintain composure and assume leadership roles, the chaos was simply too overwhelming. The storm's relentless fury continued to wreak havoc, shattering more windows in its wake. Crouched on the floor with my arms shielding my head, I could swear I felt the wind coursing through the school building. At that moment, I wondered if the gusts might possess enough force to lift me off the ground and bear me away. There was nothing to cling to for support. Beside me, another girl wept inconsolably. In defiance of the teacher's exhortations to put away their phones and take cover, students began frantically dialing their families. Time seemed to elongate into hours, and with every passing moment, my apprehension for my parents grew. They had never acknowledged the possibility of a natural disaster like this, let alone prepared for it. I agonized over the prospect of them being injured or worse. The girl next to me, whose sobs had persisted unceasingly, was none other than Regan. I muttered a frustrated "shut up" under my breath, though I doubted she heard me amidst the deafening howl of the tempest outside. Despite the school's sturdy brick construction, I couldn't shake the fear that it might be razed to the ground, leaving me buried beneath the rubble. Eventually, against all odds, the relentless wind began to subside. It was almost unbelievable, but it appeared that we might have indeed weathered the storm's onslaught. Now that the relentless downpour had ceased its relentless assault on the building, and the windows were no longer shattering, the distant wails of sirens filled the air. I presumed it wouldn't be long before they allowed us to return home, but that wasn't the case. Another hour lapsed. Confusion and uncertainty prevailed among us. A teacher had attempted to switch on the radio, but it remained silent. The adults kept repeating that we couldn't leave until we received the all clear, though we were left wondering, the all clear from whom? And what were we supposed to do about our families? I could sense my breath quickening, sweat trickling down my arms. I felt a panic attack setting in, a sensation I hadn't experienced since childhood, usually during thunderstorms. My mom used to urge me to be stronger, while my dad would often just chuckle at my anxiety. All of a sudden, I leaped to my feet. I need to go home. I cried out. I have to find my parents. A teacher shouted at me to stay down, but I refused to comply. I have to find them. I screamed, bolting for the door. The teacher seized my arm with a grip that felt like it could wrench it from its socket. You must stay here, she asserted firmly. When it's safe, a rescue team will escort the students home. I wriggled, sobbing and crying out, oblivious to the stares of my peers. My sole focus was on escape. In the end, I grew too weary to continue the struggle, collapsing onto the floor alongside my classmates. I waited. 2 more hours elapsed. My stomach rumbled with hunger, and I was so fatigued that I could barely keep my eyes open. Yet simultaneously, my heart raced, and the prospect of sleep seemed elusive. My thoughts remained fixated on my parents. Somewhere amidst the chaos, my phone had gone missing. Others' phones had either lost signal or run out of battery. I'd never felt so helpless, merely sitting and awaiting our fate, completely ignorant of the unfolding events. When would the rescue team arrive? What was the extent of the damage? At long last, a rescue team entered the school. I began to rise to my feet and make my way towards them, but others were standing up too, all clamoring to go home, seeking information about their families. In that moment, I knew I would push through the crowd if necessary, do whatever it took to escape and reach home. Over the next few minutes, the teachers shouted at us as the rescuers attempted to calm us with soothing words. We were on the verge of becoming a mob. Accidental elbows and stepped-on toes were common occurrences. I feared I might get crushed. At some point, I lost consciousness, and when I finally came to, a rescuer was guiding me out of the school. The scene that greeted me as I stepped outside is etched in my memory, forever unfathomable. There was devastation all around. Streets were inundated, abandoned cars scattered haphazardly, some even overturned. Sirens blared incessantly. The sky remained shrouded in gray, ominous clouds. The shops I had known throughout my life now had shattered windows and torn apart walls. Stray animals navigated through the floodwaters or sought refuge on higher ground. I stood there feeling utterly numb. My family's home was only 6 blocks away from the school. Was our street, our neighborhood, our house subjected to the same chaos? I attempted to run once more, but a rescuer held me back, cautioning about the dangers. He informed me about the severe flooding, the potential health risks from contaminated water, and the persistently strong winds. He insisted I stay with him, proposing that they would take me to a shelter. I demanded to know about my parents, but he assured me they would collect my information at the shelter and make every effort to contact my family, albeit with the caveat that it might take some time. I can't wait. I need to know. Our home is right there. I pointed towards my neighborhood and provided the name of the development. He regarded me for a moment before responding. Most of the houses in that area are destroyed. Hopefully, those who were inside them sought shelter in storm shelters or basements or evacuated. Your parents might have left without you, but we'll find out soon. I pleaded with him to let me go check on my house, but he remained resolute, pulling me away as I continued attempting to sprint towards my neighborhood in search of my parents. Eventually, I was transported to a shelter with my classmates, and we waited there for what seemed like an eternity, even as darkness settled in. There was some food available, but my appetite had vanished. I couldn't fathom that something I'd feared throughout my life had materialized before my eyes. Phobias were supposed to be somewhat unrealistic, but here I was in the midst of this desolation, my home in ruins, and no means to contact my parents. A boy at the shelter tried to offer some solace. He shared his own worries about his house and his hopes that it had survived. He also expressed concern for his little sister, wondering if she had been evacuated from her elementary school. He even suggested playing cards to pass the time. However, I merely sat there, lost in my thoughts. At some point, exhaustion must have overtaken me, and I found myself asleep on the cold shelter floor. It wasn't until the following morning that we started receiving updates about our families. It was heartbreaking to witness people learning the fate of their loved ones, whether dead or injured. Still, I kept a close eye on those who received the news that their family members were safe and that they would soon be reunited. I prayed that the call would be for me, and finally, around noon, it came. The voice on the other end of the line informed me that my parents were in the hospital, in the process of recovering. My mom was mostly okay, with just a few scratches, but my dad had lost his leg. I was left in a state of shock. None of it felt real. If it weren't for the visible destruction outside my window, I might not have believed any of it. Questions flooded my mind. How would my father cope without his leg? Was there a risk of infection? Did the hospital have enough staff to provide adequate care to everyone? A kind policeman offered to take me to the hospital. I practically sprinted into my parents' room, finding my dad in a dazed state. I tried to avoid looking at his bandaged stump and simply expressed my overwhelming relief that he was alive. My mom shared the same sentiment. They had been anxiously worried about me for hours, unable to get in touch with the school or obtain any information. My mom admitted it was the scariest experience of her life. We spent the entire afternoon together, not discussing the future, our living situation, or how long my dad would remain in the hospital. For the moment, all that mattered was our togetherness. We had lost everything else, but we hadn't lost each other. My mom eventually said, "I'm sorry we didn't take your fears seriously. This goes to show us all that life can change in an instant, that our worst nightmares can become a reality." I didn't know how to respond. I was still in shock. However, I felt deep down that surviving this ordeal meant my fear wouldn't dominate my life as it had before. I would always be wary when storms approached, always wonder if it could happen again. But now I knew I possessed the inner strength to endure, and my loved ones understood the genuine possibility, hopefully making them more cautious. We were reunited, given a second chance together. I hoped we would endure the challenges that lay ahead in the aftermath.